Something really funny happened here a few months ago, and I thought really I should share it. One of our local posties who delivers our mail came and stood at the gate, and he said, "Oi, what does monastery mean?" And I could tell by the tone of his voice that he was a pro-Christian. In fact, it came out that he's a born-again Christian, and I shared with him what my heart was saying, and I wanted to engage in some banter, pleasant banter, harmless banter. And I happened to say to him that I was a spiritual lap dancer for JC and the Sunshine Band, and it totally threw him. He couldn't believe me in a monastic habit saying that I'm a spiritual lap dancer for JC, and he asked me who was JC. So I said Jesus Christ and the Sunshine Band were part of a spiritual pop group of interfaith Franciscans. He wasn't amused. In fact, he was very challenging, because he started quoting chapter and verse from the Bible about different faiths and that the Christian faith was the only faith. And I began to feel my sense of humour slowly drifting into the back of beyond. But I just looked into his eyes and I just said, "But doesn't it also say in this holy book that God said, 'In my Father's house there are many mansions'?" And I asked him what it meant, and he looked at me puzzled and confused, and he couldn't answer it. So I said to him, "Are you aware that before Christianity was established, that Hinduism had been going for 5,000 years? And he looked perplexed. And I said to him, "It's been said from various scholars that in the 30 years of Jesus' quiet life, in his silent life, non-public life, there is strong evidence to suggest he went to India and he learned the art of meditation, and I'm sure he must have had many gurus assist him." Well, he was shocked. And then I thought, oh, go for it. You know, you've really landed yourself in it here. So I just said, "Are you aware that Jesus was married?" Well, I think I nearly had to provide resuscitation. He said, "No way." I said, "Well, if you understand Jewish law and the Talmud, no celibate male, however religious they are allowed into the Holy of Holies. They have to be married. That's part of the condition." And he said, "Well, it doesn't say that in the Bible." I said, "No, it doesn't, but it does say that Jesus was invited to speak in the synagogue, and that implied in Jewish law that Jesus was married." And as I said to him, this thing about celibacy, I said, it wasn't introduced by Jesus, because a lot of his followers were married. In fact, the apostles, with the exception of John, were married, but you never hear of their wives. It's as if they've evaporated or disappeared off the earth, and their children. And I think that's to do with the narrow-mindedness of the church or the early fathers. But celibacy didn't really come into the church until the middle century, the 16th century, and it came in not because God directed them to enforce celibacy. It was because clerics had mistresses and they were afraid of them making a claim for child maintenance. So coming back to being a spiritual lap dancer for JC and the Sunshine Band, it's important to say this as a lay monastic living a simple, contemplative, enclosed life. One thing we desperately need to see us through this journey is a sense of humour. And not only do I shock people by saying that, but I do it with a sense of fun. And I have a habit of answering the phone when I know it's a friend that's going to ring, and I happen to say St. Francis' House for Wayward Women. And I've been caught out a few times where a client would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got the wrong number." But I'm also known lovingly by friends as Father Ted from the sitcom Father Ted, which is on Channel 4. On a good day I'm Father Ted, but on difficult days when I'm not so good, I can be Father Jack. I think it's important to say this, that if you wish to nurture that spiritual life, you do really need a sense of humour. And I believe that Jesus, the barefoot Galilean, Jesus, the Jewish Essene, had a great sense of humour. And there's evidence from the first miracle of his public ministry, the marriage of the Feast of Cana, that Jesus and his apostles and disciples were forced for him to create his first miracle. When his mother came and said, Jesus, they've run out of wine. So they had to turn so many barrels of water into wine, and Jesus performed his first miracle. And I guess they drunk the well dry because they were having such a great party. Why is it that people have this view that monastics, that lay monks, spiritual people are miserable? I know from my own journey, wow, you meet a lot of devout people, but they've no sense of humour. And I think it's important to have balance, isn't it? It's important to laugh at yourself. And I think the best thing to do is to look in the mirror. And apart from saying, I am a child of it, but laugh at yourself. It's good for the ego. It's good to keep it in check. It's good to remind yourself that you're here not to create disciples, but you're here as a child of God in service to the light. So that poor postman, when he heard me say I'm a spiritual lap dancer for JC and the Sunshine Band, when I meet him now, he gives me that discourteous look as much as to say, oh, you are a mad monk. And I don't mind people calling me, because I think it's good for the soul. And for you to nurture a spiritual life with your God, whoever your God is, remember we're made up of 3 rooms, mind, body, spirit. And it's important to have equilibrium. It's important to have balance. It's important to have time for prayer. It's important to eat sensibly and healthily. But it's equally important to make time for the soul, the spirit, and reconnect with the divine through the natural world. So being a member of the Teo community of Interfaith Franciscans really is an incredible concept given to our hearts by Francis. And that is to honour all that God has created for us as a free gift, and to come to God through the natural world, to embrace the animal kingdom, to embrace the elements, and to allow them empower us self-heal. Try and nurture a sense of humour. Excuse me. Try and nurture joy in your heart. Because there are days when the dark night of the soul kicks in, when others accuse you rather unfairly, where the light of God within you seems to provoke those who have no light, who are living in crisis, and it can make them extremely antagonistic towards you. As I found recently with one of our neighbours, who's very anti-hens. He's forever reporting me to the council, and I'm forever getting visits, and they find nothing wrong. But now I realise that the light within us, the light in our little monastery here, is actually raising a lot of his fear issues for him to self-heal. So let's continue to be lap dancers for the light. Let us celebrate the love that we have. Let us celebrate our reawakening to the divine. And there's nothing wrong with being a spiritual lap dancer for JC and the Sunshine Band. And when I say JC, I'm referring to Jesus Christ. But let us not be accused when Gandhi said, I like your Christ, but not your Christians, because your Christians are not like your Christ. Love and light.